Hiya everyone, and welcome to my channel. Here are 5 of the most unexplainable mysteries of the world. Number 5. Spring-heeled Jack. Spring-heeled Jack is an entity in English folklore of the Victorian era. The first claimed sighting of Spring-heeled Jack was in 1837. Later sightings were reported all over the United Kingdom and were especially prevalent in suburban London, the Midlands and Scotland. Spring-heeled Jack was described by people who claimed to have seen him as having a terrifying and frightful appearance, with diabolical physiognomy, clawed hands and eyes that resembled red balls of fire. One report claimed that beneath a black cloak, he wore a helmet and a tight-fitting white garment like an oilskin. Many stories also mentioned a devil-like aspect. Others said he was tall and thin with the appearance of a gentleman. Several reports mentioned that he could breathe out blue and white flames and that he wore sharp metallic claws at his fingertips. At least 2 people claimed that he was able to speak comprehensible English. In the early 19th century, there were reports of ghosts that stalked the streets of London. These human-like figures were described as pale. It was believed that they stalked and preyed on lone pedestrians. But the most important of these early entities was the Hammersmith ghost, which in 1803 and 1804 was reported in Hammersmith on the western fringes of London. It would later reappear in 1824. Another apparition, the Southampton ghost, was also reported as assaulting individuals in the night. This particular spirit shared many of the characteristics of Spring-heeled Jack and was reported as jumping over houses and being over 10 foot tall. The first alleged sightings of Spring-heeled Jack were made in London in 1837, and the last reported sighting is said in most of the secondary literature to have been made in Liverpool in 1904. According to much later accounts, in October 1837, a girl by the name of Mary Stevens was walking to Lavender Hill, where she was working as a servant after visiting her parents in Battersea. On her way through Clapham Common, a strange figure leapt at her from a dark alley. After immobilising her with a tight grip of his arms, he began to kiss her face, while ripping her clothes and touching her flesh with his claws, which were, according to her deposition, cold and clammy as those of a corpse. In panic, the girl screamed, making the attacker quickly flee from the scene. The commotion brought several residents who immediately launched a search for the aggressor, but he could not be found. The next day, the leaping character is said to have chosen a very different victim near Mary Stevens' home, inaugurating a method that would reappear in later reports. He jumped in the way of a passing carriage, causing the coachman to lose control, crash, and severely injure himself. Several witnesses claimed that he escaped by jumping over a 9-foot-high wall while cackling with a high-pitched, ringing laughter. Gradually, the news of the strange character spread, and soon the press and the public gave him the name Spring-heeled Jack. Perhaps the best known of the alleged incidents involving Spring-heeled Jack were the attacks on 2 teenage girls, Lucy Scales and Jane Alsop. Jane Alsop reported that on the night of the 19th of February 1838, she answered the door of her father's house to a man claiming to be a police officer, who told her to bring a light, claiming, "We have caught Spring-heeled Jack here in the lane." She brought the person a candle and noticed that he wore a large cloak. The moment she handed him the candle, however, he threw off the cloak and presented a most hideous and frightful appearance, vomiting blue and white flame from his mouth, while his eyes resembled red balls of fire. Miss Alsop reported that he wore a large helmet and that his clothing, which appeared to be very tight-fitting, resembled white oilskin. Without saying a word, he caught hold of her and began tearing her gown with his claws, which she was certain were of some metallic substance. She screamed for help and managed to get away from him and ran towards the house. He caught her on the steps and tore her neck and arms with his claws. She was rescued by one of her sisters, after which her assailant fled. On the 28th of February 1838, 9 days after the attack on Miss Alsop, 18-year-old Lucy Scales and her sister were returning home after visiting their brother, a butcher who lived in a respectable part of Limehouse. Miss Scales stated in her deposition to the police that as she and her sister were passing along Green Dragon Alley, they observed a person standing in the angle of the passage. She was walking in front of her sister at the time, and just as she came up to the person, who was wearing a large cloak, he spurted a quantity of blue flame in her face, which deprived her of her sight and so alarmed her that she instantly dropped to the ground and was seized with violent fits, which continued for several hours. Her brother added that on the evening in question, he had heard the loud screams of one of his sisters moments after they had left his house, and on running up Green Dragon Alley, he found his sister Lucy on the ground in a fit, with her sister attempting to hold and support her. She was taken home, and then he learned from his other sister what had happened. She described Lucy's assailant as being of tall, thin, and gentlemanly appearance, covered in a large cloak, and carrying a small lamp or bull's-eye lantern similar to those used by the police. The individual did not speak, nor did he try to lay hands on them, but instead walked away quickly. Every effort was made by the police to discover the author of these and similar outrages, and several persons were questioned, but set free. Nobody was ever caught and identified as Spring-Heel Jack. Combined with the extraordinary abilities attributed to him and the very long period during which he was reportedly at large, this has led to numerous and varied theories of his nature and identity. While several researchers seek a normal explanation for the events, other authors explore the more fantastic details of the story to propose different kinds of paranormal speculation. Skeptical investigators have dismissed the stories of Spring-Heel Jack as a mass hysteria, which developed around various stories of a bogeyman or devil, which have been around for centuries, or from exaggerated urban myths about a man who clambered over rooftops, claiming that the devil was chasing him. A variety of wildly speculative paranormal explanations have been proposed to explain the origin of Spring-Heel Jack, including that he was an extraterrestrial entity with a non-human appearance and features, for example, his retro-reflective red eyes or phosphorus breath, and a superhuman agility deriving from life on a high-gravity world, with his jumping ability and strange behaviour, and that he was a demon, accidentally or purposefully summoned into this world by practitioners of the occult, or who made himself manifest simply to create spiritual turmoil. The mystery of Spring-Heel Jack remains unsolved. I always think about this case when I'm walking in a dark alley on my own. Maybe Jack is waiting on the corners that you walk today. Who knows? Was he a normal man who enjoyed the pleasure of scaring others? Or was he another entity out of this world? Number 4. the dancing plague of 1518. The dance epidemic of 1518 was a supposed case of dancing mania that occurred in modern-day France in the Holy Roman Empire from July 1518 to September 1518. Somewhere between 50 and 400 people took to dancing for weeks. There are many theories behind the phenomenon, the most popular being stress-induced mass hysteria, suggested by John Waller. Other theories include ergo and religious explanations. The outbreak began in July 1518 when a woman called Frau Trophea began to dance fervently in a street in Strasbourg. Trophea kept up the constant dancing for a whole week. Soon, 36 others joined in, and by August the dancing plague had claimed 400 victims. Dancers were beginning to collapse. It is said some even died from a stroke or a heart attack. No one knew what caused this reaction, which meant that no one understood how to remedy it. By early September, the outbreak began to subside when the dancers were sent to a mountain shrine to pray for absolution. Events similar to this are said to have occurred throughout the medieval age, including 11th century in Kolbik, Saxony, where it was believed to be the result of demonic possession or divine judgment. Some sources claim that for a period the plague killed around 15 people per day, but the sources of the city of Strasbourg at the time of the events did not mention the number of deaths, or even if there were fatalities. There do not appear to be any sources related to the events that make note of any fatalities. Ned Pennant Ree also claims that the final death toll is not known, but if the claims of 15 people dying per day were true, then the toll could be into the hundreds. Some believe that the dancing could have been brought on by food poisoning caused by the toxic and psychoactive chemical products of ergo fungi, which grows commonly on grains such as rye used for baking bread. This could have been an example of fully developed cases of psychogenic movement disorder happening in mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness, which involves many individuals suddenly exhibiting the same bizarre behavior. The behavior spreads rapidly and broadly in an epidemic pattern. This kind of comportment could have been caused by elevated levels of psychological stress caused by the ruthless years, even by the rough standards of the early modern period the people of Alsace were suffering. Some claims have suggested that the town was possessed by demonic energies, as some of the people danced for weeks to their deaths. Other claims have suggested that a witch in the village cast a spell as punishment for killing her siblings and burning them on the stake. Many claims have been made, including devil worship or the devil's work. This creepy, euphoric dancing until death practice has no explanation to date. Nobody knows a true, definite answer to the questions that are being asked, and this still remains a mystery as to why hundreds of people suddenly danced for weeks and weeks and weeks. There have been other occurrences extremely similar to this one, and it is now officially called the dancing plague. Some researchers did suggest poisoning, and others stated that they believe the government were putting chemicals into the sky to test human beings and were using them as subjects of research. I really find this so creepy and strange, but what do you think? Let us know in the comments. Number 3. the mysterious phone calls to Gary Sudbrink.
Are you a space alien? Sounds like you hung up.
Gary Sudbrink, originally from New York, was in the military at the time and stationed in Texas. Without telling anyone, he decided to fly from Texas to his home in New York as a way to surprise his parents and friends. While he was at the airport in Texas, Gary says he was approached by a guy with a clipboard who proceeded to ask him his name, how to spell it, where he was going, and other personal information. Gary just assumed that the stranger was trying to sell him something, so he mostly ignored him and then went to go on board his plane. Shortly after he had boarded, a different guy, also carrying a clipboard, sat right next to him and proceeded to also question him about the same kind of personal information. Gary asked this new clipboard guy to leave him alone. Eventually, a stewardess approached this other clipboard guy, asked to see his ticket, and told him, "This isn't your seat, you need to move." Clipboard guy moved away, but shortly afterwards, he seated himself behind Gary, where he again continued the same line of questioning. Once again, he was told to move by the stewardess. Gary was rattled by these two contacts, so much so that he later called his landlord and asked her to keep an eye on his apartment while he was away. When he arrived in New York, he went to his parents' house. He then called his friend Mike, whom he was hoping to surprise with the news that he was in town. However, Mike then said to him, "What are you talking about? You told me you were coming to New York yesterday." After discussing this with Mike, it soon became obvious to Gary that someone had called his friend, pretending to be him, and had told him about his trip from Texas to New York. Mike swore that he wasn't joking around, so Gary assumed that it was just some weird coincidence. After this, while Gary was staying at his parents' house, he started getting calls on their home phone from an unlisted number. Calls where a robotic-sounding voice would ask to speak to him by name. The voice asked the same strange questions each time, such as, "Is Gary Sudbrink there? How long are you back from Texas?" And then, creepily, "You are being impersonated by the other voice. They are planning to make contact. Beware government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. And the sun will rise from the dark side of the moon." As the calls persisted, Gary began recording the calls, and even his father, mother, and uncle talked to the caller, but they could never get any information. Each time the voice just repeated the same lines, sometimes with long pauses between when the voice said something and when the caller responded.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas? How long? You're being impersonated by the other voice. Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Oh, is that your question? So how long are you going to be back from Texas? How long am I going to be back from Texas? That question doesn't make any sense. By the other voice. Okay. I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that question, the answer to the questions, because you seem to know more about me than I do. You know what I'm saying? Are you an intergalactic person? Are you a space alien? Sounds like you hung up. I can't believe this. Keep an eye in the sky, he said. Keep an eye in the sky? Yeah. Yes, Kenny, I can talk to him. Shh. Okay, hold on. Repeat that again. Repeat. Okay. Near Orion. Holy mackerel. Tonight or when? The full moon. Repeat. Okay, repeat last word. I'm hearing static. All of my life is moving. He hung up. Okay, should I go out right now? Right now? Okay, see, I'm not sure where Orion is now, but we'll go outside. It was show double from me. Repeat that again? I have to think about that. I'd like to see you. Hey, let me tell you something. I've been listening to you, and I've had contacts with you. Government interference? You have? Please explain what type of interference. Okay. Rise from the dark side of the moon. Okay, what branch of the government? What should I do? Okay. Is that good for me or bad? They hung up.
Apparently, the father and uncle were big UFO nuts who claimed to have seen a UFO not long before this. I can imagine maybe Gary and his friend Mike cooked this up between them to mess around with them, but who knows. Number 2. The Devil's Footprints. The Devil's Footprints was a phenomenon that occurred during February 1855 around the Exe estuary in East and South Devon in England. After a heavy snowfall, trails of hoof-like marks appeared overnight in the snow, covering a total distance of some 40 to 100 miles. The footprints were so called because some persons suggested that they were the tracks of Satan and made comparisons to a cloven hoof. These footprints, most of which measured about 4 inches long, 3 inches across, between 8 and 16 inches apart, and mostly in a single file, were reported from more than 30 locations across Devon and a couple in Dorset. Houses, rivers, haystacks, and other obstacles were travelled straight over. Footprints appeared on the tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls, which lay in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting drain pipes as small as 4 inches in diameter. The superstitious go so far as to believe that they are the marks of Satan himself, and that great excitement has been produced among all classes may be judged from the fact that the subject has been dissented from the pulpit. Many explanations have been made for the incident. Some investigators are skeptical that the tracks really extended for more than 100 miles, arguing that no one would have been able to follow their entire course in a single day. Another reason for skepticism, as Joe Nichol indicates, is that the eyewitness descriptions of the footprints varied from person to person. A person named Mike Dash concluded that there was no one source for the hoof marks. Some of the tracks were probably hoaxes, and some were made by common quadrupeds, such as donkeys and ponies, and some by wood mice. He admitted, though, that these cannot explain all the reported marks, and the mystery remains. Reports of similar anomalous, obstacle, unheeded footprints exist from other parts of the world too, although none is on such of a scale. But what do you guys think? Has Satan walked our earth? A thing to remember is that these footprints went on for 40 to 100 miles. In my mind, a bird or animal is out of the question. Number 1. Rupkund Lake Skeletons. The Mystery Lake is a high-altitude glacial lake in the state of India. Located in the Himalayas, the area around the lake is uninhabited and is roughly at an altitude of 5,020 meters, surrounded by rock glaciers and snow-clad mountains. Rupkund is a popular trekking destination. The size of the lake varies substantially, but it is seldom more than 40 meters in diameter and is completely frozen in the winter. With a depth of about 3 meters, Rupkund is widely known for the hundreds of ancient human skeletons found at the edge of the lake. The human skeletal remains are visible at its bottom when the snow melts. Initial investigations led some to believe they were the remains of a semi-legendary event when a single group was killed in a sudden and violent hailstorm in the 9th century. But scientific research has subsequently shown that the remains belong to 3 distinct groups who died in 2 independent events around 800 CE and 1800 CE respectively. Because of the human remains, the lake has been called Skeleton Lake in recent times. Skeletons were rediscovered in 1942, and at first British authorities feared that the skeletons represented casualties of a hidden Japanese invasion force, but it was found that the skeletons were far too old to be Japanese soldiers. The skeletons are visible in the clear water of the shallow lake during 1 month when the ice melts. Along with the skeletons, wooden artifacts, iron spearheads, leather slippers and rings were also found. When a team from National Geographic retrieved about 30 skeletons in 2003, flesh was still attached to some of them. Local legend says that the King of Kanauj with his pregnant wife and their servants, a dance troupe and others went on a pilgrimage to Nanda Devi Shrine, and the group faced a storm with large hailstones from which the entire party perished near Rupkund Lake. Remnants belonging to more than 300 people have been found so far. The studies of the skeletons revealed head injuries. According to some sources, these injuries were caused by round objects from above and were the common cause of death amongst the deceased. Those researchers concluded that the victims had been caught in a sudden hailstorm, just as described in local legends and songs. Oxford University's Radiocarbon Accelerator Unit determined that the time of death would be 850 CE. More recently, radiocarbon dating combined with genome-wide analysis of 38 individuals from Rupkund Lake found that the remains are different eras and belong to 3 distinct groups. A group of 23 individuals had typical South Asian ancestry, 1 individual's Southeast Asian ancestry, and 14 individuals had ancestry typical of the Eastern Mediterranean, and specifically of present-day people from mainland Greece and Crete. Those findings counter the theory that the individuals died in a single catastrophic event. The radiocarbon dating further suggests that the older South Asian remains were deposited over an extended period of time, while the younger Eastern Mediterranean and Southeast Asian remains were deposited during a single event. This confirms that the lake remains a complete mystery, with questions still left unanswered. Although we know what ethnic group the skeletons remain to, we have no idea what happened or how they ended up in the lake grave. There is growing concerns about the regular loss of skeletons, and it is feared that if steps are not taken to conserve them, the skeletons may gradually vanish in the years to come. It is reported that tourists visiting the area are in the habit of taking back the bones in large numbers, and the district administration has expressed the need to protect the area. Why people would want to take skeleton remains home with them is beyond me, and I find it strange and creepy that people would even consider doing that. Imagine being on a hike and stumbling across skeletal remains in a random lake. The mystery behind this is the fact that nobody knows for sure what happened to the people that they found and who they were. Why were so many people discovered in this particular lake? What's the full story here? Well guys, that's the end of the video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and if so, please like and subscribe to keep up to date with my videos and take a crack at solving some of the world's biggest mysteries together.